set of backgrounds here in terms of how we came into this.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking at training clients. And it's a little bit, maybe for you, maybe more traditional now, right? I think it's more conventional now, the way we think about that, versus Cece and where she came from almost never happens that way.
Yeah.
And for me, the world of personal training was brand new when it was one of the largest growing professions, job professions in the job market that existed when I came in back in, God, that was like the late 90s, right? And everybody wanted to be a personal trainer because people had figured out how to make money doing this. But my experience coming in was through strength coaches and then through bodybuilding. Because when the strength and conditioning was over for me, sort of at the collegiate level, playing football or wrestling or whatever, I then was like, well, and football was done. Like, what do I do with this? You know, I still was going to go to the gym, and it just made good sense, particularly at my age at that point. I was 20, 21 years old. I guess I was closer to 21, 22 years old. You know, when all that kind of wrapped up, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And bodybuilding was huge then. And it was kind of what you found in the mainstream gyms. That's what people knew. But it was very different from where I'd come from. And so I didn't really know how to put the pieces together. I had a little bit of mentorship there, but there were these companies out there coming forward with all of these personal trainer certifications. And there weren't a lot of them. There was about 3 or 4 of them that were kind of there. You had ACE, American Council on Exercise, which, looking back, and I'll say it out loud, I think it's one of the worst things that ever happened to personal training. It was more group exercise based. And it was kind of a cover your ass for gyms, you know, and also like a means to work up a compensation scale. But they had that. ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine, was around, which was very clinical and very cardiorespiratory based.
Yeah.
And that was coming from the institution of like the collegiate ranks, right? And then supported by doctors. So it was coming kind of out of university, and it was very clinical, and a lot of it wasn't very practical. The initial stuff that they were bringing to the table wasn't very practical for what we were doing or what I was doing at the time in the gym, right? So they added the exercise piece to it, and it was probably good at that time, but it was still a lot of missing pieces. And then these new guys came on. There was another one out there called ISSA, International Sports Sciences
I have that too. Yeah.
Association. And I believe that was brought in by a guy by the name of Fred Hatfield was behind that. He was a huge power lifter, right? Okay. So he came from the strongman and the powerlifting ranks. And so they had a much different approach to this. Sure. And then the National Academy of Sports Medicine was just coming on the scene. And they came from the world of physical therapy. So they were clinical, but they were also much more about functional anatomy, form versus function. There was a lot more time spent in functional anatomy at the time. You needed to go and do these 3-day, you know, sort of seminars and courses. There were proctored exams, you know, at that time, and then the things evolved.
Then there was also the NSCA as well.
Sorry, yep, it was a huge one, right?
You know, you're talking about as far as where you were at 21 and getting into the industry. So the route that I went, you know, I went into athletic training, and so in undergrad, but at the time I had, you know, a boyfriend who then became the husband and is now the ex-husband. Anyway, he was in football. I'm just giving to give some context here, but you know, he started out in athletic training as well, but he was playing football, and it became, you know, too much as far as the demand between academics and then playing football. But he knew he wanted to stay involved somehow within the fitness industry, and so he ended up going the route of corporate fitness in college. And so within the corporate fitness realm, though, so you had, like, I think 3.5 years of academics. And then that last semester of your 4th year, you had to go and do an internship. Yeah. And then with the internship after that, you had to sit and take a certification exam. And so I think you could either choose to do it with the NSCA and take the CSCS, or you could take the National College of Sports Medicine, NASM?
Yeah, it was the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
No, it wasn't that one. It was ACSM. ACSM, the very clinical one. And so that was his route into then personal training.
Which is interesting for me, because I kind of honestly feel like in some ways I kind of marry between you two, because I became a coach initially when I was 19, and I became a personal trainer, and I worked in that for a few years. And kind of the same, like, I liked working out. I worked out in high school, all that kind of stuff. It had saved me kind of mentally, emotionally working out. And so I wanted to initially didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. And I always liked people. I wanted to help people. I was good with people.
It's a common tale, actually.
Right. And so, but then I actually worked for as a coach for 3 or 4 years. And then I went back to undergrad. And so I kind of had this perspective of going through getting my degree in exercise science, having already been a coach. So it's funny. The college I went to, Cal State Monterey Bay, they are partnered with both the NSCA or the ACSM. And so we had to graduate, I had to pass. We had to go through the curriculum of the NSCA for the CSCS. So I had to pass that certification. But one of the classes that I actually struggled in the most was ACSM, because I argued with that professor all the time about how this is not applicable. They wanted you in that formatting to day one with whoever the new client is, get their 1 rep max on every single exercise, get their leg extension, and to base every single your exercise prescription off of all these. Literally, it would have been 3 hours of testing to do an initial session with a client.
Yeah, that's not practical.
It's not practical.
That's not reality.
Like all these testing of, VO2 max and different heart rate zones and muscle isolated step tests and muscle strengthening and all this stuff. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And we had to build a program based off of this. Right. And I would argue with him because I was already a coach. I was a full-time coach while I was going through undergrad, and I knew what practical experience was. And I knew that this doesn't compute. This math ain't mathin', like you always say, right? So that was a very interesting. So I found a lot of value in the education piece. There's still a lot of things that I learned getting my degree in exercise science, but it was I think about a lot of the coaches who went to undergrad right out of high school, and maybe they even went to all the way to get their master's before they ever worked with a client and worked with an actual human. And then seeing them come into the gyms that I worked at and struggle. One, do you actually have like good client rapport and actually ability to talk to people? But how do you, hey, in this textbook, I was shown that these biomechanics, this is how this works, or this test, but now how do I see this on, Sally?
Yeah, they needed help bridging the gap.
Yeah, what does this look like on Mary Jones, the 40-year-old housewife who's never worked out before in her life, versus the 20-year-old college kid that was in the lab in college that you were working with that might also be an athlete?
Yeah, so Red Dot Fitness is an internship site for one of the local universities here. And that was a challenge for Scott and I when we would have these interns come in from their exercise science program, and they would want to observe or get some practical experience. And they had the textbook information, but the practicality, the hands-on was lacking.
Yeah, it was really
very lacking. And so that was a challenge.
And I think that's the difference for you, is you had all the hands-on because of the advanced level and your course of study, right? And going through, athletic training is very hands-on, right? Yeah. And then
back in the day, yes, they've changed the curriculum.
Is it different now? Is it not as much hands-on?
So now it's a master's entry level program.
Okay.
So the structure, it's a 2-year program, whereas
before
when I
you're
went
ever
through
even working with students, or athletes,
or with anybody, yeah. So when I went through it, it was a 4-year program, and every class from my second semester on was, something about athletic training, and it had a lab. It was hands-on. There was the classroom work, but then there was also the observation hours, and then there was the actual athletic training clinical hours that you had to get as well. So I can see where, I was telling you about the ex-husband, why he got out of it, because, it was living, studying, breathing athletic training. And so, you would go to your classes, and then you were there in the athletic training room before practice, you were there during practice, and then you were there after practice. So, there was no time for any kind of like fraternities and sororities and those types of things.
The college experience.
Well, yeah, that was the college experience.
It's very interesting, because I wonder how much that is the education in, the US. And, I hear this argument too with a lot of physical therapists who are now have to expect to get a doctorate before they can practice. And actually one of our clients who actually internship here, who's going to school in England, and she's doing a sports med program. It's very interesting because it's a sports med kind of athletic training. You can kind of branch out, but she is just now starting, but is already working with students and already having to be hands-on. So the system over there, and that's one of the reasons she chose that school, because it's a lot more of a hands-on system versus just getting the education here. And then you're not actually getting your hands on bodies before you actually get out of it. So
I wonder, CC, did you see that change happening to being more, I guess, classroom based? from being hands-on based when you were a professor?
So at the time, there were 2 routes into taking the certification exam for being an athletic trainer. There was the accredited route, and then there was the internship route. And so, yes, I did see a little bit of a difference because the accredited route, you had classes specifically for athletic training and labs, and you had to do observations, and then you were assigned to teams where you're actually doing athletic training. And then the internship route, it was much more self-motivated. So you would have your basic classes like anatomy, physiology, nutrition, and those types of things. But you didn't have specific classes geared towards lower extremity, upper extremity, modalities, head, neck, and spine injuries and those types of things. You got that actually in the athletic training room. So if your athletic training staff was good and they had the time to be able to spend that with you, and then you would get all of the, there's a tick list of things that you had to experience and become proficient at. Once you completed all of that and the hours of observation, which was like probably double than what an accredited program had, then you could sit and take your certification exam. So I did see a little bit of that, but then I don't know, probably 10 years ago or so, I don't know, but then they changed it from athletic training being an undergraduate program to being then a master's entry-level program. And at this point, I'm so far removed from the educational process. I don't know what it looks like at the master's entry level, but I'm assuming that you have your basic classes that you take in undergrad, and then you apply to the athletic training master's program.
So I had, again, going back to my early experience, it was kind of a renaissance period, right? With what was happening with coaching as it was moving into gyms. There were some big companies like 24 Hour Fitness was one of those. There was another company out there called Crunch Fitness. It still exists, but it was different then. And then this is before I even worked for Bally Total Fitness, which was another huge conglomerate, right? If we're not a conglomerate, but a huge company that was putting coaches on the floor because there was money to be made there. And there was at the time, like it was blowing up very fast. And so obviously these personal training companies had a real interest in that, and like, how fast can we get people through here? And in my beginning experience, there was a high fail rate, like just with the testing process. Like you had to come in with a certain amount of foundation in order to get through there. Again, the testing process was much different. I'm not saying it was better. I'm just saying it was much different in that you needed to know. You weren't just ticking boxes. It wasn't a Scantron test, if you will. But also what was happening during that time is the people that I was getting in front of at some of these courses were recognizing that there were still major gaps, right? That they were doing a much better job than because they hadn't learned that way. They'd come from the institution, right? Or had one of these more clinical certifications, underneath them. And so they were hiring very smart people. And to me, this is what I picked up. This is the point of me telling this story. And that is, they were taking people that had actually been successful at coaching, right? They had actually been on the floor and had clients over years. They had been physical therapists. They had been chiropractors. They had been strength and conditioning coaches. They had been these people that are now seeking this new journey into personal training. And how do we bring this together at the gym level and give this to the general population? Right? Not hurt people, not elite athletes, not collegiate, athletes or professional athletes, but how do we do this? And they actually started branching off after a while because they found themselves having to work inside a box that they didn't like. To your point, I think maybe this goes back to maybe, again, moving into this professorship and doing this going, I don't like this. This is too restrictive for me to actually get the messaging across to these folks that I know they're going to need when they get out there. And so what this turned into was then you had, much like you see other training industries work, is that you see these people start to branch off and do their own things. And what I ended up doing was I was finding out who those people were. Now, this is way before social media, and the interwebs were just kind of becoming a thing. Like they were getting popular and they were being useful in this sense. And so I was traveling all over the country to sit with or visit with these people in the courses of the seminars that they were teaching, 3-day, 5-day, 2-day, 1-day, whatever. I was weaseling my way into the back end of some physical therapists, like continuing education courses and things like that, because it wasn't so restricted at the time. And so I was trying to pull all this knowledge together while training clients in the gym, right? And training myself and having, again, a bit of experience kind of in a couple of different environments, strength and conditioning rooms and whatever else. And I say that all that to say is I was getting all of these different perspectives, right? And again, these were from people that had actually done the thing. And we're still doing the thing, had very successful practices or gyms or training centers that they were working with people in. And all the things that I had kind of been taught foundationally, maybe in what some of these certifications or even what I was learning from people that had degrees, they were recognizing how much they didn't know. And they recognized how much, well, I guess what the limitations they had thought they had on themselves and that they thought they should be putting on their clients, in getting their client from whatever point A to point Z, right? Or even point A to point B. Because to your point, it was, they come out with this institutional knowledge of this is how you train somebody, and it's a 3-hour assessment of all of these things I need to do. And if anybody's paying attention, there's a lot of this going on right now. We're hearing some stuff going on in sort of the media world. 60 Minutes just did an interview with Dr. Peter Attia, who I really like. I think he does a pretty good job. But they're talking about some very, very specific things, and it reminds me a lot about where this came from. It's kind of like moving back to, hey, there's some stuff and it's getting a little bit more clinical, and the consumer now is starting to understand that it can be. And so things start to get put into these boxes or silos of like, I need to do it this way in order to get this result, without taking into consideration the concept of individuality and where somebody is coming into this, what baggage they're bringing along with them, and how do I move the needle forward? What are the big rocks I need to move? And so what I learned was like, while things like form, mechanics, nutrition, psychology, emotional states, I guess I would say like orthopedic injuries, what are all fits into it. What I recognized was all that stuff was being taught in silos and nothing was really coming together. And so coming back, like I think for just in what we're talking about today, like form and the importance of form and mechanics when it comes to training clients, the way I was taught to what I discovered and then was, I think, validated by these folks, again, that have been doing it for a very long time in a lot of different places, was much different than what I learned. And I recognized that I had hamstrung myself and my clients as a result at a lot of times. And sometimes, I'm not saying I was great, it was horrible all the time, but I probably could have gotten people a lot further down the road had I just kind of stepped back for a second and put away the tick list or the checklist of items that I thought I was supposed to be going through, and tried to spend a little bit more time understanding what my client needed, what they wanted, and how to get there with them in their particular circumstance. And getting there wasn't just like, all right, what does their posture look like in this particular movement? But it's also like, how many days a week do we have to work on this, right? Because this is a low commitment level individual, right? They don't have a lot of grit, right? They've never really done any of these things before. And we need to build some conditioning, and we need to do, we need to get them a little bit more committed to their nutrition and all this stuff. And there was a point there, it was over the course of about 2 years where all the lights, the switches kind of went on for me. I'm like, there's a better way. And at the same time, the industry was taking off, and now look at it; it's massive, right? Yeah. It doesn't take long to get on the internet and find a coach that's talking about something that sounds good and has a lot of merit. At the same time, I think there's a lot of missing pieces.
It's interesting because I think now with even when I became a coach, there was social media and things were, people were sharing things and opinions, but it's 10x what it was when I became a coach, 11 years ago. And I think it's interesting because even though there's a lot more information, there's still these camps of people that get really dogmatic about things. So even though you would think that the general population or the general exerciser or the general coach, which those are three very different categories, general pop, just general person, general exerciser, and general coach, you'd think that they would have these different kind of whereabouts or awareness or knowledge in these different areas of around health and fitness. But you'll still find these people that are super dogmatic about their beliefs. And then even how the algorithms and things work now, it really feeds into their continued belief systems around movement, around exercise philosophy, around health philosophy. And people almost get more narrowed now than they did I feel like 10 years ago. Narrow-minded.
Yeah.
They get tunneled in because
you use up all their bandwidth for that one thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And so when you think even like we want to talk about form today and movement and mechanics. And I love the idea that when I became the evolution of the mindset of a coach, and I think a coach who, maybe it was a little bit different for your setting because you came in more in the isolated rehab and you came more in an education realm, and you had, I think, hopefully a lot of people who had who are doing the thing around you. But when you kind of become a coach, I think a little bit more like Scott and I did, where you kind of go into a gym, you're a guy who's worked out, you're learning all these things, I know how to work out, and you go in really feeling like almost like puffing your chest, like thinking you know the thing. And then you really quickly start to learn the things you don't know. And I think as you learn more, you start to like understand form and mechanics, and you start to it's easy to get really dogmatic about these things or really rigid on these things. And I remember myself going through these periods where I really, in a lot of ways, if I think about it now, I kind of did some clients some disservice, and I held them back from reaching their goals because this person who's exercising 2 days a week, right? And I'm going to spend 40 minutes of their session trying to perfect their squat mechanic and fix this little asymmetric shift that they have. And I think when you become a more educated coach, or hopefully individual or exerciser, and hopefully the general population can get to this point, you start to learn that there's all these buckets of, like you said, you were learning from all these realms, a chiropractor and a physical therapist and a strength and conditioning coach, and maybe the personal trainer who's actually working with Gen Pop. And it's these little tidbits of information or principles that you can take from all the individuals, and not the dogmatic that this is the way to do things. There's a lot. You have to know some of the rules to be able to learn how to break the rules, right? But there's a lot more of guidelines or situational applications, and there's a lot less specific rules to movement and health and exercise than a lot of people. It's simple to find a system and find a belief system and find a rule book and try to follow it. That's a lot simpler than to know when context matters, the individual matters, timing matters, where that person is, even, emotionally, and all these different things that can impact what builds a successful client, what builds a successful individual, whether you're coaching yourself or you're a coach coaching a myriad of people that are very, very different and have a lot of different things you're trying to manage. So I think it's learning with form of how do you take these little bit of principles and pieces from each category, each bucket, and not identify everything you do in one area.
There's a lot of ways to skin a baked potato or skin a potato.
Maybe. I can only
hear the cat. I've never heard of skin a baked potato.
I can only think of a couple, and I've never actually skinned a cat, but I get where you're going with that. I think
a little less gruesome baked potato.
So you mentioned a couple things, and that's principles, and those are typically there are some very tried and true ones, and then there are, again, all these other things that go into how do we apply this principle.
Yep.
And what that turns into, again, is it can get very overcomplicated, and again, who are we talking to? Who are we dealing with? What are we really trying to get accomplished here? At the same time, it can get very dumbed down. And there's somewhere in the middle there that I think works really well for, like, if we're trying to find like the 80% solution, but you have to understand the audience you're dealing with and who you're talking to. And I think over time, like, the audience is increased because they have the more access to it, right? And as that audience is increased, then the people that are sending the message have tried to find their particular piece of that audience and how to talk to them specifically. And I think that's good. I mean, that's marketing 101, and there's nothing wrong with marketing. It becomes a dirty word. I think there's marketing, and then there's the intention of what you're trying to do, which is what makes it dirty or not dirty in my mind. But because people buy and sell anything, right? If it satisfies an emotional need or a knee-jerk reaction or whatever. But I guess my point of that is there is a middle ground here. And so when we're talking about, like, form and movement and mechanics and how much that matters, let's just, if we can all agree that it matters, right? It matters a lot. Like, but how much does it matter? I think is the question that people have the biggest challenge with. And I think if you're a newcomer to this, and I liken this to my journey in the things that we do on the After Dark podcast, was I approached that and the things that I was trying to learn there the same way I approached learning how to be a coach. And that is, there is no one size fits all. There is not the way, there is a way, and a way is dependent on what what the outcome is you're looking for. More specifically, it's going to be very specific to who are you dealing with, what is their actual need, right? And or application. And that's where this thing gets lost. So what people end up doing is in the fitness world, health and fitness world, is they end up cherry picking things that that maybe it's being fed to them. So it just makes sense. Like, I'm seeing a preponderance of this, so this must be true. This must be the right thing, and that's the right thing for me. Or they're borrowing somebody else's application for themselves because they think that's what they need. And a lot of times I think this starts with like an overinflated sense of self-confidence in their knowledge or their understanding of the thing they're trying to do, without understanding all the baseline. Like you mentioned, like, I'd already been a coach. And what I learned in going through the institution of education and getting your exercise science degree was there's all these little pieces that either validated what you were doing. You're like, oh, I should have thought about that differently. Maybe I need to go back and apologize to some people. Or now I understand this at a way deeper level. And I understand, because I understand that, I understand how important this particular part is and how much less important this other thing is. And again, so when we come back to like former mechanics, like I see a lot of trainers, to your point, and I did this too, like, oh, this is how you do the exercise. And if it doesn't look like this, then the exercise or the exerciser is wrong.
Yep.
And that's what we're doing. Like, we're siloing things. We're drawing this hard line down the middle, go right or wrong. I think there's some right, there are definitely some wrong things to do, right? Depending on who you're working with and what you're trying to get out of it. But I think there's way more right things to be examined than the clickbait stuff that we see. Like, this is wrong. This is what's going to kill your gains or whatever. Or this is what's going to hurt you. This is what's going to injure you. And this comes back to playing on fears, right? And ultimately trying to sell something to somebody based on your personal standpoint on it, not necessarily the looking at the greater body of work of what's been done out there and what actually works across the board.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, I hate social media.
Yes,
and it goes back to what Jeff would say: don't learn from social media. That's not where your learning platform.
It's a great jumping off point if you know what you're looking for, and that this is the problem: is people are looking for an answer to satisfy something like almost gratuitously, or again for self-gratification. This validates why I'm doing all the right things. That's bad, right? In my mind. At the same time, it's like, okay, well, that kind of validates what I'm doing, but I hear this other guy saying this. But if you're not paying attention to the other guy and what he's saying, like, you'll never come to that rationale, that reasoning, like, why is this the right thing for me?
And I really, really, really struggle with social media. And if you follow me, you see that I go through these periods of, I really want to make an impact. I really want to help people. I get to help people
exhausting, dude.
And do a lot here. And I want to be able to spread to the masses. And I think I can provide good information. And then sometimes I just go, fuck this. Yeah. I can't do this. It's so mentally and like taxing on my soul, and it's such a struggle for me because I think there is a lot of benefits to it. I think there's a lot of good that has come from it, but I also think there's a lot of bad and a lot of misrepresentation, misunderstood things. And there's a quote, I forget the exact, it's some philosopher, but basically, like, the novice knows nothing and they know that they know nothing, and then the expert or the professional starts to think they know everything, and then the master knows that they know nothing, right? And it made me really think about, there's a lot of these people that are the novice and they think they're becoming the expert in the world because of social media, and they think they know a lot, but they really don't understand a lot of these things. And that's where I think social media can be dangerous based off these kind of dogmatic groups. And, versus for us, I think as coaches that have been in this industry for a long time, we know that we know a lot of things, but there's still a lot of things we know that we don't know, and how complex these things. And we still learn how to apply these things to individuals now and today that are different than we would have done a year ago. Yeah. Right.
I'd be the first to admit I had a lot of things wrong. I've changed my mind. I'm public about the things that
for sure,
I've been all in on and gone, I've changed my mind about this, and here's the reasons why. I'm not embarrassed by that. Yeah. I don't regret anything. Yep. I do wish I'd done better at certain points, but one of the things, like when putting stuff out on social media, is I'm always very, very, when I say always, it's with the greatest intention to never put out anything that I couldn't potentially be wrong about, right? And if I'm putting that out, like, this is what I think based on what I know. There's a lot of other ways to approach this, like, and I'm not doing that from a place of not being held accountable, because I don't want to be held accountable. It's the opposite. It's because I'm holding myself accountable, knowing what I know, going through what you basically explained there, which is like the Dunning-Kruger model, right? Like at some point, you reach this level of unconscious incompetence. Like you just don't know what you don't know yet. And then at some point it becomes conscious incompetence. Like, oh shit, like I don't know this thing. And what you do at that point, I think, is what defines you or what pushes you forward. But basically where you're at is kind of at like the peak of Mount Stupidity before you have to get there. And I really feel like a lot of folks and a lot of coaches, a lot of the consumer has reached that unknowingly, right? They just don't know they're quite there yet. And because there's so much going on, I think it retards the evolution into the bottom of that curve, which is like, okay, now I know I don't know. And then where this weird energy starts to happen. Like, how do I direct this energy that I feel, this angst, this nervousness, this fear of failure, this shame, whatever? I've been putting out all this stuff and I'm wrong. And what are they doing at that point? And I think it just takes longer for people to get there, and even longer for them to come out of it, because there's so many things coming at them, validating that it's okay for them to be doing this thing that probably isn't the right thing for them.
So how does this apply basically to form? And I think right now, there's kind of these two major camps of this. And then there's obviously all these little sub camps and belief systems within this. But there's a lot of these people who kind of argue in regards to form and technique and mechanics. There's one side that, they're like creating fear around movement, that you need to be, if you have any asymmetrical shift or any asymmetries, even though we're asymmetric beings, like if you have any of these improper mechanics, don't do anything. And I remember I had a client years ago who someone told him like, hey, I can't work out until I find alignment, basically. And I said, oh, so you're never going to exercise. Right. And, there's that side of things, right? That form, everything needs to be perfect. Load doesn't matter. Intensity doesn't matter. All those different things, you need to move perfectly. Then on the other side, there's all this things that is graded exposure. Your body can adapt to anything. Basically, technique doesn't matter. Form doesn't matter. Getting hurt is all about how you're titrating the exposure to the stimulus, so you can adapt to anything. And again, whether it's a good mechanic or a bad mechanic, extreme knee valgus, extreme spinal flexion, extreme, elevation of your shoulders in a position, things that, on this side, on the form side, that people get like, oh, if you do that, you're going to explode, which that's one thing that's bad. Your body is meant to move how it's meant to move. But on the other side of thing of like, oh, as long as I just slowly introduce this, I can do whatever and form doesn't matter. And I think like the answer with most things is the answer somewhere in the middle. Right. And a lot of people can't take that nuance and understand that, yes, your body is adaptable and you don't need to be perfect. And a lot of things, a lot of injuries can be managed, a lot of outcomes can be managed, a lot of success can be found, which is how do you apply the principles and how is your programming and how is the individual and how is your graded exposure applied. That is true. That statement can be true. But on the other side of things, putting someone in a relatively better position for an exercise that is beneficial to them can be safer, right? If someone is maximally loading in a deadlift, I probably want to be able to get them into a relatively rigid spinal position.
It's a good idea.
It's a good idea to try to do that. But you're not going
to all of a sudden have somebody do a maximally loaded deadlift. There's going to be the whole titration up to it, right?
Which is, again, that is the principle of the graded exposure, right? So there's a graded exposure of, can this person hip hinge, right? But then if I'm even thinking one from a muscle building stimulus or from I think a force production stimulus, having a more rigid lever from their trunk will be more beneficial to lift the most amount of load, and will also, from a hypertrophy stimulus, work your legs in a better position than we would want if you're having too much motion at your spine. Your spine may not need to be a perfect, flat, no movement whatsoever, may not need to be that, and on the other side of things, there is benefit for your spine to be able to articulate and move and handle some loads and capacity that you shouldn't have to brace maximally to go pick up a pen from the floor, right? Yep. That's the thing that I teach clients as well. And so again, it's this principles from in between of how do I apply this? And yes, if I want to work a specific tissue or work a specific movement pattern and probably limit some injuries that would probably occur if I just let that person pick up this deadlift, that even if they're prepared for it and graded exposure, but if they're getting all time kinds of, spinal rounding and then extension and then rounding and extension, if they're not prepared for that, that takes a lot to prepare for. And I'm probably going to limit some of their benefits from being able to be braced in the spine. And so I'm kind of getting into the weeds a little bit here, but that's a really good example. And that's something that's talked about a lot of, can your spine move in movement? Should you be rigid? Sometimes it changes the muscle stimulus. So there's also this camp of people that are very, very focused on what muscle am I targeting right now? And so mechanics impact that a lot. How you line up your structures, you can think about using whatever this part of your lat all you want, but how you're also lining up the vectors and things like that also impact how you're working it, things like that. So again, I'm kind of getting into a lot of this too, but on the other side of things, yes, your body can be adaptable and your form does not need to be perfect before you start adding some intensity. So I have some clients on, even now that I struggle with, that they don't want to apply any intensity to their movements because they're so worried about their movement being perfect. And I think there's other issues that come with that your movement doesn't need to be perfect. Your movement can have some variability. And so how I really describe it more is it's like a spectrum, or it's like a target. And our goal is to target towards this ideal movement pattern, but it's okay if it's not dead centered every single time, right? But you still want to train with that intention of trying to get to the center of the target, right?
Yeah, I think about this. So going back to kind of what you were mentioning there about the spine and the deadlift and rigidity, it's interesting because we'll see people that are like, well, you don't load that deadlift until they can do it perfectly, right? Well, there's a couple things that happen here. But before I even get into that, we'll see them do that and be completely like locked into this form has to be perfect.
Yep.
I don't want to load a shitty movement pattern, however we're describing it. And then in the next workout, they'll be bending over to pick up a sandbag or a medicine ball off the floor with that rounding is happening, right?
Yeah.
It's essentially deadlifting that sandbag or deadlift.
Yeah.
You're lifting dead weight from the floor. It's a deadlift, just doesn't maybe look like the conventional deadlift with where you've got two hands fixated to a bar with plates that are like 8 3/4, 9 inches off the floor and whatever else. Like it doesn't show up, movement doesn't show up like you or like that in life for you. That is that very fixated position where you're picking up from the same position all the time. So even if I'm very good at the deadlift, but let's say now I'm picking something up that's even a little lower to the ground, I'm doing a deficit deadlift, or I'm doing something where I've got the larger, like you see in a lot of the strongman, they have the big wheels on the end where I'm picking that up from a higher position or whatever. I should be
or I'm picking up a sandbag that's not a perfect position.
Right. That's awkward. I've got to get my hands underneath that. I have to reach around that, which means now oh my God, you have shoulder protraction happening instead of having your lats, locked in. There is some thoracic flexion and maybe thoracic flexion happening in this movement. And my point is like, I think people could probably get this now. Like, look, there's a lot of things happening here, but I'll also say this, and that is like going back to teaching somebody how to keep that rigid spine in a conventional deadlift position. And if you don't load them, they're never going to know how to do that. So sitting there with a dowel rod or a broomstick, right, and going through this position, or an unloaded bar, or something that's very, very light. We have like aluminum bars out here that weigh like 10 pounds, and you throw like 2.5 kilo, technique plates on the end of that thing. It's sitting at the same height. It's the same deadlift, and they can kind of do that, or they can do it pretty well. But as soon as I put weight on there, what happens? Now they actually get a stimulus, right? They get something fed back to them because of the load that exists, and they have to learn how to do it correctly. But if you just spend your entire time going through quote unquote movement, right? And this has to be perfect before I start to load that movement pattern, you're leaving a lot on the table because you're never actually teaching somebody how to engage the things that need to be engaged. You're never sending the muscle building signal. You're never sending the strength building signal, and you're never sending the signals that make them aware of what needs to be better here. And more importantly, you're not giving yourself as the coach the feedback that you need to see when your client actually does that. Again, in the maybe 2 hours a week that they're training with you, so that you can then program for the things into their program that can help them, right, get better at this, or know how to coach them when they're online or not with you and in the gym on their own.
There's a technique that I really love to use for someone, especially who's a little bit more novice, but even for someone who just kind of needs to fix a pattern. And this kind of training is called RNT training. So reactive neuromuscular training, right? And this, for someone who doesn't learn, for example, a common thing is like, how do you engage your lats? And you can kind of, like you said, coach them with the PVC and explain to them what their lats do and try to talk their ear off about how to engage their lats, right? And then you could even try to load up that bar and try to teach them how to engage their lats. But they may not be able to find it in that position. What RNT training does is it causes your nervous system to have a response to different forces on the body, different pressures on the body, different things that your nervous system is going to respond to. You think about like someone's tried to push you over and you kind of naturally push into them. Your body's responding to that pressure. So like something that I really love to help you teach you mechanics, but also begin to load is if you add, like, for example, in a deadlift, add a band that's pulling the bar forward away from you. And then now you have to respond by pulling that bar into you, and it helps teach you to engage your lats. That's just one example. And it's endless, but there's even some reactive neuromuscular response to load. Right? Something that we hear a lot with clients, especially newer clients, is they almost say sometimes it's almost easier when the weight's heavier.
That just happened to me yesterday with a client.
That just happened to me today.
Kettlebell swing is a great example.
Especially something ballistic like that, where you need to feel, because your body needs to have some sort of load to respond to. Your nervous system needs a response. Yes, the very experienced person can co-contract their body and create tension in space without any response. But learning these things are a really, really great tool to help ramp up the intensity for someone to something that they really are strong enough and can handle, even if their technique is not perfect. And it's a way to add more intensity while also teaching them how to move and how to engage things. And I think in a quote unquote safer way, and a way that's more optimal for producing better outcomes for, more strength, more force coupling, more power, all these different things that are good things to help progress an individual.
Yeah, there's some underlying things that come along with that too, is confidence. Oh, I can do this,
yes.
Right? This is not as heavy as I thought it was, right? Because then you're kind of breaking through some mental barriers. I think it's just, what's important here is to understand is that the body is an amazingly adaptive machine, but it will only adapt to the stimulus that you're giving it, right? It will revert back, or just, if you're not making it work, you're not giving it a reason to adapt. And at the same time, it's very tolerant, right? It's very tolerant to the different things that we give it. Look at the most unhealthy person and ask yourself the question, like, how is that person still walking around on planet Earth with, maybe they're severely overweight. They eat junk food all the time, right? They now have orthopedic issues because of their lack of activity and mobility. There's so many things like add up, and you're asking yourself, like, God dang, man, how does this person even get out of bed every day and get through life? Well, that's because the body is an amazing adaptive machine, and it's extremely tolerant to stress, right? To a certain extent, and things will break down. The idea, though, is that we're able to titrate that stress and work within the tolerance levels that it has. And that's not something that I would expect the general consumer to understand how to do. It's very hard to explain this to them too, right? So it's way easier to say, if you do this wrong, you will get hurt, right? Versus if you do this, if you keep working on this in this way, it will lead you to better outcomes with regard to your strength, your hypertrophy, your conditioning levels, and those kind of things. And we can work into more, I don't even want to say perfect, but we work into better mechanics and better form through a process like that. And again, I think it's important to understand here is, like, if you've not been an athlete, like if you've not ever really worked through these types of movement patterns before, is it that you're not strong enough, or you're just not coordinated right now, right? And that coordination is a lot of things, right? There's balance, right? There's proprioception. There's all these fancy terms or words that we could use. But basically, it's like, do you know what your body's doing in space and how to control it? Sans the strength part. Right? Because the strength part is definitely going to be a component of this in terms of how much stimulus we're giving you. But if I can continue to give you a stimulus to where you are now starting to have to be coordinated, right? In order to
be reactive.
Then have to be, reactive to it, then we can get a lot further, a lot faster, and we don't have to worry about hurting people, right? Again, that should be a concern. Like, your job is to keep your clients safe, right?
Do no harm.
Yeah, do no harm, as they say. But at the same time, there's some gray area in there. It's like, what does that really mean? I think that's where people struggle. And it's much easier, I think, as a newer coach, particularly, to sit back and go, oh, no. We don't do that until this looks perfect.
Yeah.
What are you leaving on the table there? And how are you restricting, or again, retarding your client's potential growth process by doing that?
And it just makes me really think about corrective exercise, which term.
I hate that. I used to love it.
Yeah.
Because to me, it made sense when I heard it and when it was being kind of taught. NASM.
Bastardized.
Again, going back to the certifications as they started. This was huge for them. This is what they sold
OPT model.
This is what they sold their business on. And again, keep this in mind. This came from the physical therapy world, right? So there's this term corrective exercise. What are we really taught? Every exercise could be corrective and no exercises could be corrective.
I love that. So there's a statement that I love of corrective exercise is only corrective if it's done correctly. Mm-hmm. And any exercise can be corrective if applied correctly, right? So that idea that one, and this is kind of where people look down on kind of the physical therapy realm of a corrective exercise like doing a clamshell, right? Doing an exercise that is very isolated strength of that. So first off, yes, that individual needs to make sure that they can actually work that muscle, right? Work that, let's say, glute med in that context, right? But then a lot of people where the issues come from a not successful rehab plan. Okay, now they've done that clamshell. Maybe they needed more isolated strength there. How do they integrate it to their exercise? And what biomechanics can they now apply that through either closed train exercises where they're standing up? How are they, maybe not even just like, how do you feel your glutes in your squat, but there might be exercises that challenge your glute med because maybe you are getting some knee pain because you have a big asymmetry in your pelvis that is causing some weird funky mechanics in your knees, and that is over stressing the inside of your knee. That can be true. No, you're maybe not going to ever be a perfectly aligned straight pelvis, but it can also still be true that if we work on some mechanics on this side of the hip, it might alleviate some of your pain and allow us to fast track that graded exposure to more intensity, right? So yes, graded exposure, but if I continue to expose you in those bad mechanics, man, the inside of my knee hurts. Man, the inside of my knee hurts. Now I can't actually continue to progress. So sometimes if I can integrate those things, but then the goal of, yes, I need to have the isolated corrective exercise, right? The thing that we hate, but how do I apply that to their program to continue to progress it and load it, but then also apply that intention to other exercises that are still the typical exercise in an exercise program.
Which indirectly corrects the form that you're trying to master
exactly.
At the end of the day.
And that's where, and really, I've been explaining this to lots of different clients. I have a client right now who has a very big chronic pain and issue and herniated discs and things what he's been struggling with. And what I'm really trying to help ingrain him, and another client, I think I have lots of clients like this where I'm trying to help them from this really, really honestly dark place of pain and discomfort. A client I had right before this podcast of where they really struggle with this and really getting to understand of the whole goal right now is how do we integrate these things that might need a little bit more love and might need a little bit more attention. But the thing that's really going to fix this long term is how do we integrate this to exercises that provide a heavy stimulus and that provided a stimulus that actually make you stronger, but not just stronger globally, but stronger specifically and in a coordinated way. And I think a lot of people think coordination as, does this movement look correct? Right? Am I moving through space in a way?
I think it's a very true statement.
And I think of athletes a lot with this because athletes are very, very good at making the exercise look correct and look like they're doing it with the intention that you want. If I videoed it and I just showed someone the form, if you just saw it on a video, it would be great. But they are not using the actual tissue that we want or the stimulating the muscles that we want or stimulating the things that are actually going to give them a good outcomes. So that's teaching that individual to how do we engage the right things? How do you engage your quads in this squat to help that you keep getting that patellar tendinopathy that is getting pissed off because you're not engaging your quads through this range of motion. Now the tendon's getting pissed off. So that's even for the person who's a good coordinated mover, there is a neuromuscular coordination deep to the motor unit of the muscle that is there. Is that muscle firing that I want, right? Is there actual, and we talk about mechanical tension being the driver for hypertrophy and hypertrophy being beneficial for the strength and things like that of a specific muscle. But if we are trying to rehab or integrate to keep you or prehab and keep you healthy into your season, we also need to be able to integrate mechanical tension of specific tissue that is applicable to the exercise for you as the individual.
Yeah, I think in that respect, like we get a lot of questions when people walk in and they kind of see stuff happening on the floor and it sort of looks like physical therapy. To your point, like a lot of people find us because they're struggling and they're dealing with pain. Right? For whatever the reasons are. And largely a lot of the reasons that they come in is because they started having this pain And rather than figure out why they're having that pain and address that directly, and again, directly doesn't mean I have pain in the knee, the problem's in the knee, right? That going back to like trying to fire things on or get things switched on, right? And integrate them. The body is an integrative machine, right? Yep. Everything works with something else. Like nothing really works in isolation. Even if you're doing a bicep curl, you're working more than just your biceps, right? Yep. An isolated bicep curl. Other muscles, the muscles of your forearms, the muscles of your shoulder have to be engaged there. Even if you're locked into a piece of equipment, there is integration there. That might not be a really great analogy, but obviously you could expand this to like a barbell back squat or a barbell deadlift, a conventional deadlift. Like there's integration that has to happen through the entire body, right? In order for this to happen. But they come to us and they've got this problem that has now become very acute, right? And rather than address the issues, and sometimes they do that by going to a physician that, then sends them to physical therapy, and they isolate that particular area without understanding this global impact of all of these other things. Like, well, maybe, okay, the pain is coming at the knee, and the reason the pain is there is because we've got some articulation issue, right? We're overstressing specific tissue, and the focus becomes like, how do we alleviate that within that tissue? How do we alleviate that at that specific joint? But what's failed to be looked at is like what's happening up the chain and down the chain that's creating that tissue to be so upset with you right now, right? And again, going back to like clamshells as an example, the problem is I find with people is like, okay, so that now they've in the consumer, the person with the pain, right, is like, oh, the answer, I have the answer. I'm going to physical therapy now, and we're addressing my knee. Yeah, but the knee actually isn't the problem. The problem is happening at the foot or the ankle or the hip or somewhere else for that matter, whatever it happens to be. And we're not addressing that. So they go through the physical therapy. We've done some modalities that maybe helps some inflammation go down. We've done a few things, and in terms of isolated, maybe more specific exercises to maybe kind of distract, from what's going on there. And then they go about their way and they try to get back to their regular activities. And now it comes back with a vengeance because we haven't fixed or we haven't addressed the problem, which is outside of where you might be feeling your particular issue. And the worst part about this is when they go to the Google and they start to self-diagnose what their issues are and they try to fix these problems on their own. So my point in saying that is we get a lot of people that come in after they've been working through this process. And instead of working through the process, what they're actually doing is working around it. And by constantly trying to find a workaround to it or misdiagnosing themselves, or in some cases thinking they got the full quote unquote treatment they needed to fix their problem. They got the 6 physical therapy sessions and it helped them get out of pain. Now there's the next step. How do we keep you out of pain?
And how do you get back to the activities that you want to be doing, right?
Yeah, and this is the frustration and the emotional and psychological stuff that we end up dealing with as coaches on the floor. And I deal with it, online constantly. It's like, man, I got this shoulder thing, going on, and it's really been bothering me. And so I didn't do this exercise and I didn't do that exercise. We start cutting things out. I'm like, you need to do that exercise. But this is my point about things looking like physical therapy sometimes. There are ways to integrate that stuff into your program so that you're integrating movements that can be, I'll use this in huge air quotes, corrective, right? And alleviate some things, but then immediately go into integrating the larger stimulating movements that are going to strengthen the entire system to allow you to continue to be able to build muscle, build strength, build capacity, so that you can, again, return back to activities of daily living or play, whatever your return to play plan is, or whatever it should be to get you there. But we're isolating things. We're putting things in silos. And again, if we're going back to like, well, it's because your form's bad, right? It's because your mechanics are bad. That might be true, right? But how do we work with what we have to work with here?
Yeah.
Without like going, okay, well, we're going to do nothing else but work on this very specific mechanic at the knee, which it's very limited. It does one thing, right? It flexes and it hinges. It flexes, that it's where the flexion and extension happens, right? Like, but what else is going on? And again, if all we're doing is focused on that, you can also bet that the things that should be happening above and below that are going to start to fall off. They're not going to be as good.
You're going to atrophy in those different things.
You might. That can be very true.
And so this is the role, and I think this is the role of a good coach who, at the end of the day, we are not physical therapists, but like we said, it looks like physical therapy. A lot of people come to us because they are struggling to see success, and maybe they get to where they feel better, but then they don't get to these outcomes of returning to the activities of the high performance or even just being an exerciser, and they feel lost and they feel broken. And I think like a good example of that integration for me, even I can think of this specific thing with a couple different clients I have right now, of clamshell is a great exercise for isolated strength of the glute med, right? But now how do we integrate that? Like we're talking about things going on at the pelvis. Something that I love to build on that is building someone into something like a hip airplane, which works the glute med through a closed chain where now you're moving the pelvis around the femur, and it's still working the glute med, but it's also teaching them and it's mobilizing that person's specific asymmetries in their hip, where one hip might need a little bit more internal rotation, one might need a little bit more external rotation. And then I even from there will, in a specific session, have where I start to load them in something like a kickstand deadlift, where they start to build and work that glute med through some rotation of their pelvis. They might have still needed that isolated strength because there was a big strength discrepancy from left to right. But now they've integrated, they've worked on the mobilization, the awareness, the proprioception to control their pelvis. Now we got a good heavy loaded stimulus through a kickstand deadlift, and we're aligning and correcting things there. And then within that session, someone who had knee pain and couldn't squat, now I can get them to squat after I do those exercises. So I think like the application of integration, and I'm trying to fast track you to get to some intensity, get to some loading, feel successful. It's not that you can't back squat or you can't whatever squat variation you're in right now, but it's how am I applying these exercises? What are the order? What are the sequencing? What's the dosage?
Yep.
Yes, I'm graded exposure. What's the dosage of how much I'm having you squat is an impact. But I have people where if I had them start with the barbell back squat, which is the typical thing to do in a workout, it's high stimulating, their knees just screaming at them and they can't do it. But now I've stepped back, I've integrated these things, and now they're back squatting in the middle of the workout and they feel great and they don't have pain. And so that's the idea of, yes, there might need to be time for things that look like physical therapy that are very rehabby, that you need some more isolated strength. But then how do I get you up and moving and applying that movement to now allow you to perform and get back to the activities and be stronger and in a better position from where you were from the start. And now you're being successful in either your sport, your daily life, or just reduction in pain, right?
Yeah. So when you're looking at form and mechanics, we talk about like a lot about hips and lower extremity as you move up like to the shoulder pain, right? Yep. So common, super common. And shoulders are complex and it's a little bit tough to kind of isolate like exactly what's going on. And again, there's a lot of videos and there's a lot of things going on out there and a lot of people talking about it because there's a lot to talk about.
It's probably not just your rotator cuff.
That's my point. It's part of my point. My point is like, okay, well, we're having trouble with the deadlift, right? And we're concentrated on low back, but what is it that's, like what's happening at lower mid back? Why is that happening as we move up into the upper extremity? And, lo and behold, like we also have a little bit of a shoulder issue. Well, that's a clue, man. Like some things may need to be addressed there and it's very complex. And so addressing shoulder mechanics may help your low back, right? Especially when you're doing these heavier loaded or higher stimulus type movements. Again, going back to deadlifts and squatting, like what can we be addressing there? But again, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater because it's like, oh, it's a back issue. They have another one is, what is it? 1 in 5 people have a low back issue. Like, what is that, right? There's a multitude of things that can be.
Yep.
And, obviously there's some very acute things that can be happening there, but sometimes that low back issue doesn't have anything to do with what orthopedically is happening at the low spine, right? Or at the pelvis. Could be happening much higher up the chain because we haven't addressed shoulder mechanics, right? And proper form, again, air quotes, in the movements that we're doing there could absolutely be impacting that. So again, we're looking for this isolated answer in this particular area, and it's all form for this, all form for that. But then when we go out to do these other movements, we're not addressing that. And we're calling it a corrective exercise. We're not doing it correctly, right? So we're not getting the benefit of what that thing is supposed to be in the first place. And now we have this chain of events that happens down the line.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people too who really apply, like they think now the answer to everything is just more strength to that area.
Correct.
So I think of like a super common thing.
Everything can be fixed with an exercise.
With more strength specifically to that. And that's where I do think that corrective exercises and finding what is needed for that individual really has its place. I think of an exercise, a client that we had for a long time, and he still goes here, but he had low back issues for a really long time. And he, all online now, it's doing a reverse hyper is like the favorite exercise for low back issues.
It's a great
it's a great exercise.
Right.
when it's appropriate for them. Right. This guy, I promise you, when I have worked with him and where I have found success to help him with his low back issues, he was hammering. He's like, man, every time I do that, my low back's just fucked up. Right. It hurts for days. Because if you go to this guy, his low back doesn't need strengthening. His low back is plenty strong. It is stiff. It is pumped. It is overworking. For him, it's the other things around it that now that back is doing overdrive, and that back is getting too much stimulus in every exercise that he's doing. And now you're going to go try to jam into it, try to overload it. And now, wait, I'm just trying, more strength is going to fix it. More strength is going to fix it. And that's where sometimes, again, like I keep saying this, but the graded exposure, if I just strengthen him, he's going to be fine. No, that guy needs to, what's the position of his pelvis? What's the position of his hips? His hamstrings are really, really weak. His hamstrings aren't doing the job that we need. His position of his hip stabilizers.
So his back's working too hard.
His back's working too hard. His core stabilizer, his things that are very important to not overload that system. And that really, really applies to when we talk about, we make the joke about the rotator cuff. Right. Everyone thinks, oh I have like a rotator cuff, like tendinopathy or pain or on the back of my shoulder. They just think I got to just strengthen the crap out of it and do a million rotator cuff exercises. When most of the time we've done whole episodes on just shoulders, where a lot of the issues come from the shoulder mechanics and the shoulder loading and the things that are controlling the scapula, which is the foundation and the home for the shoulder.
Which is why your rotator is pissed off. If indeed it is.
Yes. And sometimes there's a tear and sometimes there is things, but I would say 9 times out of 10, I feel pretty confident saying that when there's a lot of times a rotator cuff issue, it was because of the poor mechanics before the issue that led to it.
I just said that the other day. Yeah. We were just kind of talking about that the other day.
So.
Oh, I was going to say, I would say like 85 to 90% of your glenohumeral or shoulder joint issues is coming from scapular stabilization.
Yep. Right. It's the home. It's the foundation. If the foundation of your house is unstable, it's not the walls issue. It's the foundation's issue.
Yeah. So people think like, oh, then I need more stabilization. So more stabilization equates to more strength. It's not what we said. It's not what we said. That could be part of the answer, but what needs to be strengthened?
How are those married together?
And how should it be strengthened, right? And again, it just goes back to like, what does that scapulothoracic function actually look like for you? And yeah, you can pull a ton of weight, right? Yeah. You can load up, you can do pull-ups for days, you can load up that pull-down bar or that seated row, with a ton of load or whatever, and you're strong enough, man. It's what you're doing with that strength that ends up being the problem. And then going back to the low back thing, if we're constantly focused on we need to apply an exercise that strengthens the low back because we have this belief system that that's what the issue is, and we're starting to do these isolated movements, again, like the hyperextension or reverse hyperextension, great movement for a lot of people. Well, now we've left all of these other things out and they become atrophied or they become weak, or those are the things that actually needed to be addressed in the first place, and you're way off base. So form and mechanics are just such this generalized term now, and I'm really working on form now with my whatever insert whatever exercise you want. I'm like, that's great. That's good. We should be trying to be, mechanically or biomechanically, we try to be as sound as we can be, but it goes way beyond those basic movements. Again, deadlifting, squatting, lunging, pushing, pulling. There's so much nuance in there for the individual and where they're coming from. And here's the thing I just want to go back to, and that is, not everything can be corrected with an exercise, right? Not everything can be corrected with strengthening, to your point. Like there are underlying things there. And also, like going back, like your posture and where you are, depending on where you are in life, what activities you're involved in, whatever, like there are just things that come along with whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah. And it may not ever look quote unquote perfect. And no amount of exercise might ever change that for you. I mean, we've had several clients in here who are just like, well, this person's pretty much, the term would be casted, right? They're casted in this position at this point. Now their skeleton has changed. And what's that a function of? It's a function of activity. It's a function of muscle strength, muscle weakness, their activity, whatever they did in their profession or whatever else. If I just go in, if I look at that and I go, well, this person's got a messed up posture. And if I just apply these postural exercises, we can fix this. Okay, you can spend all day long. This dude's 50 years old. He was a bricklayer for 35 years. Dude was hunched over, right? Doing bricklaying, right? The old fashioned way. I don't know if there's a new fashioned way.
Built probably half of San Jose.
Yeah. I mean, this dude spent his entire life doing this. Like there's just certain things that aren't going to get fixed. If you're in a profession that requires you to wear certain equipment or operate on an assembly line and certain things, there are things that are going to happen there over time. Your body's going, again, it's an amazing adaptive machine. It's going to adapt to that. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to fix it. And you can apply all the perfect form and mechanics movements you want, and it's never going to dramatically change where you at. Can you get better in that position? Can you be stronger to withstand those long periods of time in that equipment, on that assembly line, in that that activity, whatever it is that you're doing? That's what we should be looking at. And it's not always going to look perfect. It's not going to look, and we shouldn't be striving for that every time. If we could get there, that's great. But the reality of it is, and this is what I learned in terms of the gray area, like you apply this for months and months and months, and you're like scratching your head. The person doesn't have any pain anymore. Like they're moving so much better. They're so much stronger. But gosh, man, I'm looking at their back and it hurts me, to look at them and the way they move. But they're functioning and they're doing the things that they need to do. Does that mean I never give the guy that's highly kyphotic, like that, again, that super upper rounded up at his shoulders, or whatever? Does that mean I never give him a deadlift? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that. The guy still needs to do those things, right? It needs to be applied appropriately, but I'm going to give him some type of a deadlift pattern or a hinge pattern. I just need the dose, right? How you talked about graded. How am I grading the stimulus over time? What am I giving to him? What makes sense? Not just because I know I need to do a deadlift pattern in my exercise program, but how often do I give it to him? What does it look like? Where do I spend my time? And what am I doing to make sure that the other things that support that deadlift with his horrible, quote unquote, horrible posture, how am I giving him, or what am I giving him, and how am I giving it to him? Again, going back to all those variables to make sure that he can continue to do whatever he needs to do for the rest of his life, which is not bricklaying anymore, right? It's golfing and, doing old man stuff, right?
Driving his car and trucks and all that stuff.
Working in his yard.
Man, and I was thinking of two things kind of when you're talking about that. First, of how I kind of explain it to a lot of people, especially that individual, is you're probably never going to fix that individual. One, it's also good to understand that they're not broken. That's just their current state of being. But you can, try to improve mechanics. You can and try to, hey, I'm going to give you a little bit more extension in your upper back, which is going to get us in a little bit closer to the target. That's a slightly better position that you might be good with. That's one thing. The other thing I was thinking about too is there's a very big difference between avoiding exercise and avoiding movements, and learning what's appropriate and you can apply for the individual that helps them be successful. So they may not ever be able to get into if a guy's super kyphotic rounded like that, he's probably never going to be able to get into a good back squat position. So if you're spending all your attention trying to get him into he needs the back squat. Back squatting is next in my pyramid of exercise that is challenging that I need to get him to be successful to graduate the pyramid and get his gold star that he can back squat now. And I spent all my time trying to get him more thoracic extension, more opening his chest, opening his shoulder position so he can hold that bar. And so now he can back squat versus where, hey, maybe before I got him, I'm still trying to improve his quality of life with maybe a little bit better posture
or
performance. But hey, now I know that successful exercise for him is doing a safety squat bar where it doesn't require that same level of open chest position, thoracic extension, but now he's being successful. He's still loading his legs. He's still working on his mobility. He's still improving his total fitness, his total health markers, his total strength. I'm still maybe trying to help improve his thoracic position, but I'm not wasting all my time for this guy who I see 2 days a week who wants to do other shit in his life of trying to force and feed him to get into this specific exercise. So it's way different. It's not working around necessarily or ignoring and saying, like we talked about earlier with the person who's tried to rehab themselves but keeps getting frustrated that they're just, oh, hey, my knees have issues. I'm just not going to work my legs. That's stupid. You shouldn't just not work your legs. But what's the successful exercise for you? Maybe back squatting to your full range of motion is not the right exercise for you right now. So
yeah, to your point, like I think that's where it starts is people get married to or they choose an exercise because it's in their matrix of exercises that they need or want their clients to do. Or it's the easy one that gets chosen out of the online, library so that they can dump it into their online platform or whatever to give somebody, whether it's the right one or not. And this is what I do. I rotate these things through. There's a framework for doing this for the people that can do it. At the same time, it doesn't mean that you can't give somebody a back squat, to your point. We just find the one that they can do for them, right? Where and when it makes sense. At the same time, like if you're doing that and each time you go into one of those, it has to be perfect form. And if it's not perfect form, then we just keep doing it, right? Until we get it right. Like, I think that's where people get into trouble, right? And coaches, again, that may be a little newer in the process, that don't really understand this gray area that we're talking about. Like, where is the middle on this? And that takes reps, right? Just like anything else, just like getting better out there on the floor. If you are trying to make something better or correct something, it's going to take reps. And there is a feeling out period that has to happen. And at some point you need to know through the feeling out period, okay, where are my thresholds in terms of how much stimulus can I give this person to still get an effective dose out of this, right, without overdoing it. And sometimes that means just moving the movement somewhere else. You just mentioned that, like, we start with the hip airplane and then later we do the squat. Now, I think for a lot of, let's say, more knowledgeable coaches, they go, that makes perfect sense to me, right? Yeah. Because I've woken some things up in there, I've switched some things on, I've mobilized it. Now I'm going to integrate it later into something else. But for a lot of coaches, and for those people that have coaches or are sort of self-taught, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, largely a lot of where my journey was like trying to self-teach and then go, is this the right thing, right? Not necessarily to go have it validated, but go test it against somebody else and ask the questions of people that had done it longer than I had and whatever. My point is they choose this movement as the movement that needs to be done. And like, a squat pattern is important, but the exercise selection and the form that's used within that exercise selection can vary per person. And if you don't understand what that kind of looks like, especially if you're the user, right, that's doing that, just because your squat doesn't look like the guy in the squat rack next to you doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, right? It just means that's what it looks like for you for now. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad, because I don't know. Like, I can't make that kind of,
right?
I can't make that kind of a statement. But there's some things that you could kind of peel back the layers on and kind of understand, like, okay, I'm okay here because I can still give myself that, 3 sets of 8 with 2 RIR, and I'm still getting this stimulus here, but where might I not be getting it, and what else? What are the other things I could be focused on later in my workout or before I get to the squat rack? If that's the chosen exercise that I know I'm married to and I have to do, or whatever. I think that it's the approach to the process, and understand that the process isn't the same. Most programs you're going to see are going to start, again, there's going to be a lower, upper type of dominant, type of exercise selection. You're going to see some tried and trues that are kind of there. And I would love for all my clients to be able to do all that stuff, because we know, again, we just know those are good movements to do to provide this kind of stimulus. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to do them. It means I'm going to do them. I'm just going to put them in places that may seem a little unorthodox at times in order to get them better at it over time, so that we can build into it. It may never be it may never give them the stimulus that I really want, or they may really need for that particular area or muscle group or extremity or whatever. That doesn't mean we can't or we shouldn't do it. Like, the squat doesn't have to be, 3x8 at 2 IR or 5x5, in order to get, an effective dose out of it. If we put it later in the workout, we can still get a great effective dose if we've switched things on, stimulated things otherwise.
Man, so, we talked about kind of our journey as coaches, and I used to think about when I first became a coach and really started to feel like I was wrapping my head around things, I would program out all my clients' programs for at least a month out, and I would write every single workout, and I would plan even to the numbers, right? Because I calculated out the percentages that I want them to progress on and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to make a confession to a lot of my clients that if they're listening to this, they might be a little shocked, but most of my clients now, I do try to get them on some sort of progressive block, but a lot of them, I don't write programs for them. I adjust their program on the fly based off of what I'm seeing for that individual that day.
There's going to be experienced coaches listening to this right now. They'll be like, I'm glad somebody said it out loud.
That makes sense.
Right, it makes
there's a skeleton.
Yes.
I have a plan,
but
you know what? There's flexibility built in there based on how they're presenting that day.
Yep. So, and I've had clients joke about, like, are you writing my workout right now? And yes, I am, because I'm adjusting, and you're not paying for me from the time that I spent to write this workout before. You're paying for my years of experience and thousands of people I've worked with at this point to apply what I feel like is appropriate for you today, whether that's the load, whether I say, you know what, I'm not feeling the back squat today, or you know what, I'm not, based off what I'm seeing, I'm not feeling this range of motion or this load, or this is, or hey, you know what, normally back squats at the start of the workout, but I know you said that your back's feeling a little bit achy today, and we're going to adjust adjust some things. We're going to still try to get into our squats, but we're going to reorder these things. We're going to bring the last sequence of movements that I think is going to make you feel successful. So by the time you get to your back squat, now you can feel good doing that. Instead of wasting my time of trying to hammer, like cueing the shit out of you doing that back squat.
That's what's on the paper.
That's what's on the paper. We're supposed to back squat first, but what your back's hurting while you're doing it, just try to brace harder, and you can do this back squat now. Where your goal of the coach is to learn how to plug and play exercises that make that client feel as successful as possible in that given instance, in that specific workout, but over the long term throughout their time with you as a coaching client relationship. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point to wrap up on. So again, there's a lot of do-it-yourselfers out there, and they're trying to put things together. And again, they have a good base of knowledge, and they've had good success at, over their time. Things to think about, right? Just in terms of like, hey, I know it could be a little bit better here. This hasn't been feeling great. How might I reapproach my program? There's probably a lot of ways to do that. So, get a coach, right? That's the idea, is get a coach, get somebody that can talk you through this thing and figure out where you can make those adjustments. Usually the people with the higher training age, we can make some minor adjustments that can have some really large impacts. If you're the person that's kind of walking into it, right, and you're not quite sure, and there's a fear associated with, because maybe you had a coach before, or you've seen things, or you have friends, or you have things, right? You're bringing baggage to the table where there's pain and things like that. Like, get a coach, like get them off, get off to the right start. It's usually less than you think it is with regard to how much you need to do. There's some really basic things that you could be doing. Let's feel that out for a while. Let's work through the process. Either way, you got to be committed to that process, right? And there's no one size fits all to everything. And there may be a little bit of a feeling out period for both people to kind of feel how this impacts them over time through consistency and so forth. And there's a lot of great programs out there that start with, like you said, like, this is what we would like to do, right? This is what we would like to see happen. Again, like when you're trying to program something where it's kind of available to the masses, that's the toughest part, is giving them like, okay, we think we have a pretty good program here. We've tried to take into consideration the concept of individuality, but I can't, right? There's just too many people on this, right? So what I have done, though, is I have tried to expose them to different things, but more importantly, to your word, and that is provide flexibility, right? To move things around and put things in place and give them options, right? For the things that they do. The back squats in the program, and you for whatever reason, you've got a limitation and that's not there. There are several other things that you could be doing to still get that done. And I think that's the challenge, is people think they have to get it done and it has to be perfect all the time, or they are doing it all the time and it's far from perfect, right? Like, again, there's way more right ways than there are wrong ways in my mind to do stuff. But my point being is they start doing this thing and they get into it, and then they're just frustrated and they're challenged, and then they start getting these aches and pains, and they're frustrated because, man, I've been doing this with perfect form, right? I've been working so hard on my form, yet they're weak, right? Because they've stayed in this, I got to build form. They haven't challenged themselves. Like, what happens? What's the threshold when the form breaks down, and why is that breaking down? And again, to your point, like, that's what happens on the floor every day, right? With your clients, as you go out there, a lot of times you're giving things, you're managing flexibility in this program. You're looking at it going, all right, we're going to push a little harder today. I actually didn't have this in the program today, but we're going to push. We're going to stay here for another set or another few reps, or I'm going to give them a little bit more load today and see where that is. And that's calculated. Like, I'm doing that in a very calculated, honest, and careful way. But I'm like, okay, now we just saw the form breakdown, right? Now we know kind of where that threshold is. Why did it break down, right? Is a key component here. And if you kind of understand those things, then you'll start to understand, like, I still can load this person to a certain extent. And it is important to find the failure point. But if you haven't done the work to work up to that and everything has to be perfect, I think it stifles people's results in terms of finding what those thresholds are, providing those stimuluses and those effective doses in order to move the needle for them in the way they need and want it to be moved, especially when, we only are seeing them 2, maybe 3 times a week, and they're doing other things outside of here.
This is where I think a lot of the value comes from the intuition of an experienced coach, or hopefully you can really get to every individual, the intuition of you as an experienced exerciser who's taken ownership of your own outcomes and goals, right? And so I think it is hard sometimes to find what that balance is, the intuition of, hey, are we not feeling it today? Meaning like you're not in a good place. You have other life stresses. Your back's hurting. Let's back off. Let's be smart. Or are you being lazy? Are you not having good effort? Are you not focused? Are you thinking about something else? And learning to find that intuition of like, hey, some days is it you just don't want to do the back squats because they're hard? Or is it because, hey, we really should try to find something else to be successful? So hopefully the coach that you're working with, you have a good relationship with them, that they can have that intuition to help you be successful, to push you when you need to be pushed, help you take a step back when you need to take a step back, talk through things when you're feeling frustrated or you're not being successful, and reanalyze and reassess where you're at. Or hopefully for you as an individual, you can get to this point in your own program, even if you are following another coach's program or whatever that looks like, that you're able to find that balance within yourself to know, hey, am I just being lazy today? Am I not putting the effort? Do I need to give myself a break? Do I need to push? How do I adjust my program? How do I do something that makes me still feel successful, but maybe I do need to give myself a little bit of a break? And I think you getting to that point, there's this, I feel like I'm finally in that point for me sometimes in my exercising, that it's really like a peaceful place to be in, knowing that, hey, I can live to fight another day. Hey, I'm feeling really good today. I'm going to push hard. I'm going to get after it. Hey, today I just kind of needed to get the work done. And finding that balance as an individual is a really great place to be. And I hope each person can get to that place someday.